Hey guys, so 81% of Top Cut at YCS Pasadena involved Tear Ishizu, so a lot of people were freaking out about a potential emergency ban list, so I thought I'd gather your thoughts on what cards may get hit if there was an emergency list. So before we continue, a big thanks to my sponsors as usual. Now another huge thanks to those that responded to my survey. We had 550 players respond. Now I do surveys pretty regularly, particularly when it comes to ban list stuff, so make sure to subscribe to the channel or follow me on Twitter to take part in future surveys. Now, to start with the player profile as usual, we had about 83% of respondents who identified themselves as competitive or semi-competitive, so that means they at least go to locals regularly and participate in tournaments. As for whether they felt an emergency list was necessary, about 2/3 agreed or strongly agreed that it is, while about 18% felt neutral about it, and with another 15% feeling that an emergency list is not needed. This of course depends on the kind of player that you are, because for example, you could be a competitive player but only play rogue decks, in which case it's pretty rough out there right now and maybe feel strongly for a new list. At the same time, despite a lot of players believing that an emergency list is needed, the majority, at 88%, are trying to be realistic and do not believe Konami would actually put out a list so fast, especially after just one premiere event at this point. I didn't play during the last time we had an emergency ban list, so let me know in the comments how bad it got during that brief format before an emergency list came out. So now let's move on to the individual cards and see what everyone predicted would get hit in the assumption that an emergency list actually comes out. Now I did focus primarily on Tearlaments related cards for this survey, so keep that in mind. So starting with Havness, over half felt that this card would get limited. Now this is definitely the first tier monster to be put in the conversation of getting some kind of hit, because it allows tiers to play on turn 0 and can really start things rolling on your opponent's turn. Reducing the consistency of playing on your opponent's turn would at least make this deck a little bit more fair. Next is Merle, which a decent chunk and 19% felt that it would get limited as well. Merle is also very good just because it enables elf play in tiers, not to mention when paired with Kit, it allows you to mill 8, which just snowballs things now with the Ishizu cards. Then we have Sharon, and it looks like players are pretty harsh because 17% predicted that Sharon would also get put to 1. It's a strong card, but at least among the 3 listed so far, I think it's the fairest. Next we have Rhinoheart, which is another potential card to get limited, although this is a card that many play at 2 anyway, so perhaps there wouldn't be too huge of an impact. Really good way to start out the turn though, and also just happens to be a warrior so that it can be searched by Rhoda. Then we have Kit Kalos, and it's surprising that 20% actually predicted that this card would get banned. Banning Kit would just destroy this deck, not to mention limiting it doesn't really do anything since most players are only running 1 and you can shuffle it back. So definitely a conundrum since Kit is such a strong card with multiple amazing effects, but I think you have to keep this card and need to hit the other tier cards for this deck to be playable. Then we have the Super Saiyan version of Kit in Rukalos, which is the newest addition from Darkwing Blast, and Konami thought why not just give them battle protection as well. The negate effect is very strong, but looks like most predict that nothing would happen to this card. Another tier extra deck monster that doesn't warrant a hit is Kaleido Heart, and most predicted that way as well. Certainly a strong card, especially when someone on your opponent's turn to spin back a card. It also has a very strong attack under Planet. Speaking of Planet, we also have almost 60% predicting this card would get limited, which would certainly be a sensible hit as OCG did the same. The search for a tier monster is very nice, but being able to pop cards when tier monsters are shuffled back, which includes when Medora or Keldo shuffles them back by the way, and not just for fusion summons, makes this an incredibly strong field spell, not to mention its use to chain block. I think if there's ever a safe bet for a tier hit, this would be the first one you can bet on. Next I added some other tier spells and traps that we're seeing a lot of play right now, but not really anything deserving of hits, and the first is Scream. As expected, most didn't expect any hits to this card. Not worth hitting, but I don't get why Konami decided to just casually give so much extra support to tiers in Darkwing Blast. Then we have Sulik, which is usually played at 1 to 2, and it's something that no one expects to get hit. The constant monster effect negation is pretty crazy, especially when you can start triggering tier monsters after you send your own monster. Next we have the tier counter trap, which again is another card mostly no one thinks will get touched. Being able to return a banished tier monster is nice and has become more relevant now that Sony players are running the Bestial package to combat tiers. Alright, now let's pivot to the Ishizu cards, which just came out in Magnificent Mavens. Starting with Agito, we have almost a third of players predicting this card will get limited. Interestingly, I know there was at least one topping list that only played one Agito, but this card is pretty nasty when you get to mill 5 with it. Then we have Kelbeck, which is the best one since not only can it help mill 5, it just happens to be a hand trap to bounce, which is crazy. Over a third predicted this card would get limited, and the original Kelbeck used to be one of my favorite cards as a kid, so I personally love this guy. Next we have Keldo, which again about a third of players predicted will get limited. Keldo is nice since it can add you another Ishizu card, but the quick effect shuffle back from either grave is honestly so crazy good. This is one of the many cards in Tear Ishizu that just makes Rogue kind of unplayable right now, especially with the rampant use of Bestial package at the moment as well. Lastly, we have Medora, which is not as great because most players seem to have cut out the traps in their list, but its quick effect shuffle is still incredibly strong just like Keldo. A little over quarter felt that it would get limited. Now, while not an Ishizu card, a card that is very popular and expensive right now is Herald of the Orange Light, which has quickly jumped ship from being a Drytron favorite to Team Ishizu tier. The Ishizu cards just happen to be fairies, and so paired with the Gamma-like effect of Orange, and also potentially being able to trigger something like Agito or Kelbeck for the mill when it gets discarded along with it, it's just a crazy combination. Looks like even 12% predicted it would get banned, with another 20% believing it would be limited. It is a really strong card and lets Tear Ishizus have an insane hand trap that synergizes with the deck, but not sure if they would actually hit this one. On to some other staples in tiers. We start with Instant Fusion, where over half predict that this card would get banned. Definitely agree on this one. Just being able to bring out Kit with this card alone is pretty crazy, and I'm kind of surprised it did not get hit on the last list. I think on the next list they probably would be putting this on the chopping block. Then we have another fusion card in Super Poly, which about 17% predicted it would get banned, with another 17% predicting it would get limited instead. An insane card that cannot be responded to, and interestingly enough, I did notice that a lot of tier lists were not main decking this card anymore at least, with some not even playing it on the side. Perhaps still worth a minor hit though. Next we have Sprite Elf, which I put in because while it is a Sprite card, it helps tiers a lot as well. About a quarter felt that it would get limited, and while I'm sure it won't get banned anytime soon, I do think that it will get limited at some point for sure because it's just too good of a card and makes the grind game too strong for decks that can play this optimally. Then we have Abyss Dweller, which about 19% predicted will get banned. It's an interesting situation since you have many rogue decks that can make this and it is their main fight to go up against tiers. On the other hand, you have tier mirror matches, and trying to turbo out Dweller first is the best choice that you have at winning, which you can't argue is really healthy either. Next we have the good old Dimension Shifter, which I put in here because it is another tier killer, but that would probably only get hit if there were other hits to the tier cards. The OCG did seem to semi-limit this card, but it looks like the majority feel that this card won't get hit. Finally, we have Mystic Mine, which not many lists are playing at this moment. Only about a quarter felt this would get banned, even though in my last ban list prediction survey a few months ago, at least half predicted that it would get banned. I guess we all just gave up hope at this point since we know Konami TCG loves this card. And finally, we had a free text option on the survey for you to put any other card that might get changed if an emergency list came into place, and the first most common response was Bestial Magnamut. Now this card just came out and isn't a direct tier support, and in fact we really need it available to combat tiers, so I don't think this is going anywhere, although the people that chose this expected it to get limited or semi-limited. Then we have Call by the Grave, which is a Saki 1-of that has divided the player base on whether it should come back to 3 or just get banned. Obviously good against tiers, but it's also good for them as well to try to stop Shifter, which is the deck's kryptonite. Lastly, another common mention card was Diviner of the Herald, which was interesting because they felt that this card should get banned or limited. Even at 1, this card is playable in Tear Ishizus to help you make Barone, but I know some of the topping lists didn't even run Herald, so a hit to this totally would not be very effective. Then I also asked how satisfied the players are with the current format, and honestly the distribution was not as bad as I thought it might be, although we did have over half of the respondents who were dissatisfied or very dissatisfied with the current format. I guess that's saying something that I don't think these results are that bad, since I thought a lot more people would be very dissatisfied with the current format. We still had about a fifth of the respondents be very satisfied or satisfied with the format, although most of these players were probably Tear Ishizu players, but certainly nothing wrong with that. In comparison to the brief format we just had before Magnificent Mavens and after that October ban list came into effect, looks like most players really like that previous format better than right now, but this is still less than a week since the release of Magnificent Mavens, so maybe the satisfaction levels will get better as the format progresses. Alright guys, so that was it for the analysis of the emergency ban list prediction survey. Thanks again if you responded or shared the survey. Hopefully this format does get better soon, and at least this tier 0 format involves a lot of interaction across both players and not just some FTK format. As always, a big thanks to my Patreons, Eileen Dice Queen, Bold Spider, Cybernetic, Brandon Jaren, Bearlord, Spooky Boogie, and Steven Phillips, and Chaz Blanks as always for supporting the channel. You guys are awesome. If you're interested in joining my Patreon, link down below. Take care guys.